we have somewhat of an adversarial relationship. And I'm kind of disappointed that Mr. Bellin couldn't be here today to share this podium with me. Probably be kind of like Siskel and Ebert. But my involvement with this particular aspect of the research started in (1983). Mr. Bellin had appeared on the Nightline television show, and there was a discussion between Mark Lane and Ted Koppel, and they were talking about the Mexico City CIA tape. And in that exchange between Mark Lane and David Bellin admitted that the Warren Commission had access to the CIA tape, which Mr. Phillips, David Phillips of the CIA, had said had been destroyed shortly before the assassination. So I'm going to detail a little bit of the history of this. On the day after the assassination, J. Edgar Hoover, the head of the FBI, sent a letter to James J. Rowell, the head of the Secret Service, and it was just a brief summary of the brief investigation that the FBI had done the day of the assassination and that morning before this letter was written. And in the letter, J. Edgar Hoover wrote the following: the Central Intelligence Agency advised that on October 1st, 1963, an extremely sensitive source had reported that an individual identified himself as Lee Oswald, who contacted the Soviet embassy in Mexico City inquiring as to any messages. J. Edgar Hoover further wrote, special agents of this bureau who have conversed with Oswald in Dallas have observed photographs of the individual referred to above and have listened to a recording of his voice. These special agents are of the opinion that the above referred to individual was not Lee Harvey Oswald. The FBI agents in Dallas felt that the photograph that they had and the tape recording that they listened to showed an individual who was not Lee Harvey Oswald, who was in custody. Now this FBI report that J. Edgar Hoover sent to the head of the Secret Service was classified until 1977. And when the FBI finally did release 40,000 pages of FBI documents, pages 4 and 5 of this document were censored. And that was the paragraph that dealt with the agent saying that this individual was not Lee Harvey Oswald. Now in 1975, 2 years before this FBI report was released, there was word leaking, and Nicholas Horrock published in the New York Times on Sunday, September 21st, 1975, a brief mention of this tape. Said the Central Intelligence Agency secretly tape recorded 2 telephone conversations between Lee Harvey Oswald and the Cuban and Soviet embassies in Mexico City some 8 weeks before President Kennedy was shot to death on November 22nd, 1963. Government sources familiar with the events said today, in response to inquiries about the matter from the New York Times, the CIA issued an unusual public statement on the matter. but it would not confirm that there were any tape-recorded conversations. In 1976, Ron Kessler wrote in the Washington Post, in late September of 1963, Lee Harvey Oswald telephoned the Soviet embassy in Mexico City and tried to make a deal. In exchange for unspecified information, he wanted a free trip to Russia. This conversation was intercepted and recorded by the Central Intelligence Agency. And the Post has also verified that the CIA failed to turn over the complete transcript to either the FBI or the Warren Commission. It gave the Warren Commission a transcript, didn't give them a tape, gave them a transcript of the taped conversation, but for unexplained reasons, the CIA failed to include the transcript of Oswald's offer of information and his suggestion that the Russians would want to pay his way to the Soviet Union. Now in 1976, former CIA Mexican station officer David Atlee Phillips reported that the tape was routinely destroyed a week or so after the alleged Oswald visit to Mexico City. And he reportedly testified to the House Select Committee on Assassinations that the CIA had not told the Warren Commission that they had tape-recorded Oswald's conversations. So up until David Bellin made his statement on the Nightline show, the position that the CIA had was that this tape had been destroyed. It no longer existed, and the only thing that they had available were transcripts. Now, the House Select Committee on Assassinations made an investigation into whether or not the FBI received the tape on the night of November 22nd in Dallas. And the House Select Committee had this to say: a review of the relevant FBI cable traffic established that at 7:23 p.m. on November 23rd, Dallas Special Agent in Charge Gordon Shanklin advised Director Hoover that only a report of this conversation was available, not an actual tape recording. And on November 25th, the Dallas office again apprised the director that there appears to be some confusion in that no tapes were taken to Dallas. Only typewritten reports were supplied. Shanklin recalled in a committee interview that no recording was ever received by FBI officials in Dallas. They also interviewed Special Agents James Hosty, John W. Fain, Burnett Tom Carter, and Arnold J. Brown, each of whom had conversed with Oswald at one time, and they all informed the committee that they had never listened to a recording of Oswald's voice. But they did not ask him if they had listened to a tape recording that was not Oswald's voice. And the committee also did not contact 3 other FBI special agents who had conversed with Oswald. So there were 3 FBI agents that they never even talked to about this. The committee went on to say that on the basis of an extensive file review and detailed testimony by present and former CIA officials and employees, the committee determined that CIA headquarters never received a recording of Oswald's voice. And again, it may be a matter of semantics. Did they receive a tape that was not Oswald's voice? And it's hardly a comforting thought that they relied on Gordon Shanklin and James Hosty to tell them the truth about the Mexico City tape when they were both involved in the destruction of a note that Oswald left at the Dallas FBI office. And one said that the other one was to blame, And they tried to pawn it off on each other, and one of them obviously has to be lying. Somebody gave the order to destruct the note, and it was destroyed. Okay, now getting to my involvement with this, on the night that David Bellin made this admission, Mr. Koppel was addressing Mark Lane, and he had this to say: continuing our discussion now with Attorney Mark Lane, Mr. Lane, you told me you don't believe that he, Lee Harvey Oswald, did it alone. Lane, I don't believe he did it at all. Then at least help us out. You've spent 20 years of your life, I assume, trying to find out who did. Lane, if you want my view as to who I think was involved, I'll tell you. Elements within the Central Intelligence Agency executed President John F. Kennedy. I believe that because in October of 1963, the CIA left behind a trail in Mexico City claiming that a man named Lee Harvey Oswald went to the Soviet embassy. He checked in with a man called Kostikov, who the CIA told Earl Warren was a KGB official for the Soviet Union in charge of terror and assassination in the Western Hemisphere. Oswald called the embassy, the CIA taped the telephone call, and Oswald said, "This is Lee Oswald, are there any messages for me?" Oswald then went to the Cuban embassy in Mexico City and was arranging for a transit visa, ostensibly to get that after he killed the president. The only problem with the whole story is that it was not Lee Harvey Oswald. It was a charade designed by the Central Intelligence Agency in October of 1963 to leave behind a series of acts, a trail which would lead to Lee Harvey Oswald after the assassination. That meant that in October of 1963, the Central Intelligence Agency was planning to place the blame on Oswald for an assassination which had not been committed, but which obviously people within the CIA knew was going to take place next month. Mr. Koppel, all right, David Bellin, let's pick up on that one point. We do know things now about the CIA that we didn't know back then. And yet, one of your commission members was, as Peter Lance pointed out, Alan Dulles, former director of the CIA. He might have shared some of that, don't you think? Bellin, first of all, the Warren Commission did know that Oswald was in Mexico. The Warren Commission had access to that tape. I subsequently wrote to Mr. Bellin and asked him about his admission on the Nightline program that the Warren Commission had access to the tape. And for any of you who have read my articles in the third decade, you know that he gave me a considerable runaround. But like Professor Rose said, I am somewhat tenacious in going after an answer that I would like to have. Now, Mr. Bellin's answer to me was, when I stated on the Nightline television program that the Warren Commission had access to the Mexico City tape recording, allegedly of Lee Harvey Oswald, it was my recollection that the two lawyers concentrating in the area of possible foreign conspiracy, W. David Slauson and William T. Coleman, did have access to that tape. You may want to write to Mr. Slauson in California at University of Southern California. So I wrote to Mr. Coleman and I did not receive an answer. And I wrote to Professor Slauson and he replied, yes, we had access to the CIA tape of Oswald in Mexico City. Now this is the tape that David Phillips said had been routinely destroyed. David Slauson says we had access to it. So I asked him, did the voice on the tape sound like Lee Harvey Oswald, who was shot by Jack Ruby in Dallas? He replied, I do not remember whether the voice sounded like his. It puzzles me how you think I should know anyway, since I never met him. He was killed, you know, in 1963.
Down, boy.
So I wrote him back and I said, geez, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to puzzle you. But the FBI said they listened to this tape and they said it was not Lee Harvey Oswald. Well, he replied to that with, Bill Coleman and I concluded on the basis of evidence we considered persuasive that Lee Harvey Oswald had been to Mexico City and done the things the Commission's report said he had probably done there, including speak on the telephone with a person or persons at the Soviet embassy. I do not remember at this time what all this evidence was, although I do, as I told you, remember that we had access to the tapes. Now he talks about tapes of the telephone conversation in question. I attempted to follow up on that and ask him specific questions about, was it a tape? Was it two tapes? Was Oswald speaking English, Spanish, Russian? His reply to that was, I have forgotten the answers to most of the questions, and I do not think it proper or pertinent to any legitimate historical research to give you the few answers I do remember.
Say that again.
I have forgotten the answers to most of the questions, and I do not think it proper or pertinent to any legitimate historical research to give you the few answers I do remember.
I see a professor.
Criminal law. So the question remains, was this secret CIA tape or tapes, because the one article refers to two conversations being taped, routinely destroyed a week or so after the alleged Oswald visit, or did the FBI receive a copy of a Mexico City tape from the CIA immediately after the tragic events in Dallas on November 22nd, 1963? I contacted Mr. Harold Weisberg, who I consider the dean of the assassination researchers, and he had this to say about that. As usual, the House Select Committee was incompetent. The tape and picture were flown from Mexico City to Dallas on November 22nd, hand-delivered by an FBI agent, later a Republican congressman. I got the FBI's records on that in one of my Freedom of Information lawsuits. As usual, the FBI questioned the wrong agent, rather did not question the right one. Wallace Heitman met that plane a little after midnight on November 23rd. The FBI has the contents of that tape. They first sent a teletype from Dallas to headquarters. Headquarters asked for a transcript. They made a transcript and sent it to the headquarters. Now, Mr. Weisberg was unable to locate his copy of that memorandum, but Mr. Mark Allen provided me with a copy of a FBI memorandum written by Gordon Shanklin, the special agent in charge, on November 22nd, 1963. He had to say, Assistant to the Director Belmont advised that we have in our file practically all of the information from Mexico City regarding Oswald's visit or trip to Mexico, except the fact that the CIA had secured some information that this individual deleted. The Cuban embassy to the Russian embassy. They later photographed him going in the Russian embassy, and Anderson has arranged for deleted, as well as pictures. And Special Agent Eldon Rudd is flying up with a naval attaché on a DC-3 scheduled to arrive in Dallas at 1 a.m. And we should make arrangements to meet him and secure this information. So I would say, I don't know, I can't prove it, but it's possible that Anderson arranged for a tape as well as pictures. So I believe that the tape was not destroyed when they said it was, and it's possible that tape still exists today. Now, Professor Rose has assured me that this will be copied and available to everyone here today. I have copies of the 1975 New York Times article, the Washington Post article, copies of my correspondence with David Bellin and David Slauson, and a copy of the FBI document from Gordon Shanklin.
One part of it left out.
And I would like to note one exceptional interagency cooperation here. These blanks on the FBI document are courtesy of the CIA. Thank you.
I need to apologize in advance for any superficiality on this. I was given it this morning and was trying to read it during the first few speakers, but as usual, I find Gary's work compelling and thought-provoking. And I'm going to ask us, what can we learn from this tale of the tape that we don't already know? I think the answer is we can learn as much about ourselves, of human nature, as by the event itself. I'm fascinated by the possibility of smoking guns, literal as well as in the Watergate sense. And surely an audio tape on which a voice identifying itself as being Lee Harvey Oswald, which in fact can be proved to not be Oswald, would qualify as a smoking gun. So I want to pick up on the last thing that Gary said. Where is this tape? Does it exist today? I mean, is there a trophy room in William Harvey's sub-basement, or Otto Otepka's other safe, or Carlos Marcello's wine cellar, or Reinhard Galen's summer place in the Tyrol, where this tape and the Babushka Ladies film and the bullet recovered by the light-haired agent in Dealey Plaza, or Seabright O'Neill's missile, where they all
behind that door, Charles.
Let's bring them on. I can only make a leap of faith and say I agree this tape probably existed, that it was transported. Whether or not it exists now isn't the point. I want to go one step further and think about just what Oswald was doing in Mexico City. If he was really there, what did he believe he was doing? If he was really there, the point being to establish this pre-assassination chain of very incriminating evidence, what did the conspirators need with a double? Why wasn't Oswald following the full script? Why couldn't he follow the full script? If the point was to establish a body of evidence that would later be reviewed by investigative bodies which were, relatively speaking, unbiased, would not tape recordings and photographs of individuals who plainly were not Oswald, wouldn't that hinder rather than move along conspirators' post-assassination activities? We have the infamous mystery man, the heavy-set, crew-cutter fellow, who appears in far more pictures, I'm led to believe, than we've ever seen. And this was an initial embarrassment. This happened early on in the investigation. And if indeed, as I said, the conspirators were out to bag Oswald, using this character or anyone else was going to backfire on them. And apparently it has. And what does all of this tell us about Oswald's role in this thing? What does it lead us to speculate regarding what he believed he was doing? These kinds of questions are what intrigue me as a writer of fiction. These are the blanks which really drive me crazy and which I'm tempted to fill in, and which I hope that will be the focus of serious investigative work. Beyond that, I have no real substantive arguments with what Gary has uncovered. I think it's very straightforward and it remains of key interest to us. Thank you.
I'd like to comment. I'm glad you both had the perspective that you do. I really enjoyed the couple of columns that you wrote, Gary, on your correspondence with Mr. Bellin. My feelings towards Mr. Bellin are kind of a combination of sympathy and the same contempt I think a lot of people have towards him, and I use that word a little reluctantly, but there's a little sense of sympathy because I'm not convinced that everyone who worked with the Warren Commission was trying to cover something up, because you only need 2 or 3 people involved to successfully do it. The rest. But at any rate, reading your correspondence with him, I can appreciate how perhaps a lot of what has gone as covering up has been just individuals covering themselves, who may have been in some sense duped, and probably most of the people working for the Warren Commission were in some sense duped. That's speculation on my part. But nonetheless, I appreciate how you bring out the extent to which people who were involved are still trying to cover how they may have been duped and so forth. At the same time, I appreciate how Mr. Drago has brought out the questions that raises about Oswald's involvement in Mexico City. What was he doing there? Was a double neck needed? The point of what I'm saying is quite simply, I think you're both adding 2 perspectives to a very relevant issue, and I think it's important for us to consider both aspects of it.
This question has bothered me too for a long time, and relates to the whole question of the second Oswald and the superabundance of appearances of clearly someone who was an imposter. Appearances which would inevitably conflict with the known movements of the actual Oswald. And this, I think Mr. Drago has hit on something that is very simple, and that most researchers have not addressed. And I'd be curious to know what anybody thinks about this.
In writings on Richard Case Nagel, I don't know if you're familiar with him, he's a former CIA agent, he mentions that there was supposed to be an assassination plot against President Kennedy around September 26th. This would have coincided with the time that Lee Harvey Oswald went to Mexico, or an imposter went to Mexico. The trail would have led up to the embassy, and there was a period of time when no one knew where Oswald was in Mexico City. So if that plot, the September plot, had gone through, Oswald had, or the fake Oswald, whomever it may have been, would have laid a trail right to Mexico City in September. That may be why he was down there.
But what about the superabundance of Oswald? And going back to the visit to Soviet Odio, for example, and the conflicts between the known and determinable whereabouts of Oswald and these appearances of these imposters. It looks, at the very least, like an incompetent job.
Well, one of the things about Mexico City that is different from any other instance of Oswald impersonation is the need for this imposter, if indeed there was one, to be able to speak Russian and to be able to have the coolness to go into the embassies and deal with individuals who will have been, by definition, familiar with intelligence operations, be more capable than others to pick up on an obvious phone. If you've got somebody at a shooting range shooting at your target, all that takes, if the point is to impersonate, all that takes is basic physical resemblance and an attitude. I mean, I can find 3 Lee Harvey Oswalds hanging around Providence, Rhode Island right now.
Mr. Vicka addressed some of that in his book.
I would go further, and I think I can speak to this. In '85, I tried to make a statement there in Washington about the second Oswald in San Antonio 2 months ago. I took it a little further, and it's now somewhere between 40 and 50 documentable appearances of N numbers of Oswald. And they do contradict all of them, the known whereabouts, apparently, of the historic Oswald. So I think they did uncover a series of second Oswald. I think it was apparent that, therefore, having uncovered that there was a conspiracy, and therefore that what you work at is the the fact that from the moment you discover that there is from September through November 21st an operation against Lee Harvey Oswald, you then have a frame-up of Oswald against a conspiracy. So many of the people who then were involved in not giving us that information, right, and dismissing it, were probably not involved in a conspiracy, but attempting, obviously, to do whatever they needed to do to keep the country quiet, to get our, our heads together, etc. So exploring, therefore, the motivations of people in this area is not necessarily finding them guilty or not guilty of conspiracy. And the second Oswald story may speak directly to that.
Gary?
Yeah, most of you have seen are familiar with the photograph of the man that wasn't Oswald, that Fensterwald wrote about, and actually I think he was responsible for getting the 2 additional photographs declassified. I don't know if it's been mentioned anywhere, but it recently occurred to me, and I mentioned it last night. Those photographs were identified originally as being Oswald, and clearly they weren't. They all were cropped, and it has occurred to me that possibly the photographs uncropped might show Oswald and that man side by side, and possibly the cropping eliminated Oswald. That's just pure speculation on my part. But the fact that they did say originally that this was a photograph of Oswald might have in fact been true. And maybe they deleted the name of the other person, or maybe they didn't know who the other person was. But after cropping them, and as you recall, I didn't even want anyone to see that picture, but originally Marguerite Oswald claimed she'd been shown a picture of Jack Ruby the day after the assassination by the FBI, and it turned out it was actually a picture of this unknown man. And they published it in the Warren documents to prove that it wasn't a picture of Jack Ruby that they showed her. And then years later, about 1975, we got to see the other 2 pictures. So has anyone else ever thought of this possibility?
Yeah, I wanted to straighten up one thing, though. You said they identified this man as Lee Harvey Oswald. I think you should make clear who it is you mean by they.
I tell you the truth, I'm not sure if it was the FBI or the CIA.
Okay, because the CIA has officially denied that they identified this man as Lee Harvey Oswald.
Yeah.
On the subject of cropping, the other thing that might happen is if the photos were uncropped, or if an uncropped version of the photos were available, there may be something in the background that would disclose the photographs were never taken in Mexico City.
Good point.
Yeah.
Or where they
Two real quick thoughts about the photos. Isn't there a story that was a Winston of the CIA, when he died, there was photos, and I don't know what the accusers you supposed to get, maybe to the corner, or just the photos, and James Angleton took them out after his death? Is there something to that?
That's what Edward Lopez of the House Select Committee found out during his investigation. There was photographs in Winston Scott's safe in Mexico City showing Oswald. It was kept in the safe because evidently other people were pictured in the same photo.
Because it is like
who might have been from the CIA, and James Genus Angleton was reported to have gone down and confiscated the photo from the safe and destroyed it.
Oh, the other thing I had real quick, when you said when you recorded that FBI memo, one thing I
Can I
noticed...
just interject something?
Go ahead.
It may not have been Angleton that removed those pictures.
Right, I picked that up from another source. too.
I've got some documentation from Mark Allen, and I don't recall right now who the other persons were, but it may not have been Angleton.
There was a deletion too in that FBI memo from Hoover. He stops at inquiring as to many messages. And you can even see this in Anthony Stone's book Conspiracy, just a few pages later, quoting almost verbatim, I think it might even be a CIA memo on the same situation, inquiring as to any messages that were sent to Washington. It's like it clips off, there's a period at the end of the Hoover memo, but the messages that were sent to Washington. So that's an important piece right there.
Yeah, there's a separate direction that Spud Fensterwald and George O'Toole, the former promise analysis of the CIA, pursued, in which there's possibly a second or third man in a series of photographs. Remember, when you say Oswald in Mexico City, it's reputed or alleged because in terms of what he looked like, he resembled Oswald but was shorter than Oswald. So we have an Oswald double possibly, looking enough like Oswald to suggest CIA complicity. And it seems to me that people with good intelligence connections were pressing the CIA and flushed out those pictures heavily cropped. So that next to that then may very well be an Oswald double, which again suggests complicity in setting up a patsy Oswald, which could be easily disproved, and hence a conspiracy in the president's death.
The other thing is the time frame. If Oswald was in Mexico City, who visited Sylvia Odillo? And also, I believe, Jerry, it was in the third decade, I believe you wrote it, I could be wrong, in terms of possible forgery in the document of Oswald re-entering America.
That's right.
Is that your article?
Going in time.
Going in
Pardon?
time.
All of his border documents and all of his evidence of travel both ways, as well as the hotel
Yep.
registration. I'm going to bring that out on Sunday.
Okay.
I'll show you the pictures of the forged
Okay, I remember we-
registry
we-
in Mexico City.
Okay.
I think
I'm going to blow it on this, blow the whistle, rather. Thank you, Gary. Given our time constraints here, we're pretty well scheduled for lunch as well. We may well have a, if it's all right with Harry, we may have a part 1 and part 2, because I know that there's more that Harry Livingstone has to share with us than he can do in the 20 minutes, but we are going to stop in the 20 minutes and adjourn to Cranston Hall. Those of you who are attending the luncheon, and that's the people that have registered for the conference, and people that have, a few people have purchased luncheon tickets additionally. So we'll meet over there, we'll reconvene over there. Those people that have come in late today, we welcome everybody, but we would like you to register during the break, during the lunch break. And, we have material here for you to register. I don't think Harry Livingstone really needs introduction. Certainly he doesn't need to the group that were with us last night, and heard some of the interesting exchanges between Harry and some of the other people. But whether you are or not, nearly everybody is familiar with a, we can actually say, best-selling JFK book, High Treason, co-authored with Robert Groden. And he's going to speak with us today about some of his continuing investigation of the crime. Here.
I am going to have to cut this short, but tomorrow we're going to have an important discussion of Joel Wagner's paper. And is Joanna Braun? Joanna Braun? Is that you? Okay, here's your hand. Because that'll give me an opportunity to get a little bit more into the medical evidence and my current research. I'm here more to answer questions, really, than I am to make statements. I'm going to make a few statements to stimulate discussion, as you know I'm good at. And then feel free to interrupt me, and if there's anything on your mind, to try to get it out. And we'll try to deal with some of these issues. Never forget that there are a great many documents missing from the National Archives. In particular, the medical evidence, the slides that show the edges of the wounds of the president, that's all gone. The interior chest photographs that would show whether or not the chest had been penetrated, that's all missing. The brain is missing, as you all know. And then we have a pattern in this case, as I tried to chart out in my book, of planted evidence, forged evidence, and missing evidence. And this is inescapable. We can't get around this. How could all this stuff walk out of the National Archives? That place is like Fort Knox, jail bars, and you have to go through successive areas of the place. And only the vice president or somebody would have the power to walk in there and walk out. Nelson Rockefeller, for instance, with a lot of material. I didn't say that he did that, but I know somebody who would say it. And so when you have a pattern like this, there has to be a suspicion of something going on. I think we're all a little bit sick to death of it. 27 years has gone by, and we have to get to the bottom of this case while the witnesses are still alive that know something, that know what the body looked like, know what the wounds look like. And I don't think we need a lot of hypothesis and synthesis and trajectory analysis and theories and everything. The autopsy report replaced an entry wound right here on the back of the president's head, close to the hairline, slightly above, although Humes and Boswell said slightly below when they were being interviewed by the House Assassinations Committee doctors. The occipital protuberance, a little bump here. The Clark panel of 4 doctors, 2 of them from Baltimore, the medical examiner in Maryland, 68, examined the photos and x-rays, and they found that that entry wound was up here. And in some of the photographs, you can quite clearly see that it's painted in the colic. I say painted because it is painted. It doesn't exist in some of the other photographs. In particular, I want you to notice, which I can pass these around, but I can't. This area here is out of focus. This was my discovery. I am not a photo expert. I'm not trained in this. I don't know anything about it. Robert Groden never saw it. Robert Groden never understood x-rays, but I had been. My best friend's a chief radiologist. He had taught me how to read head x-rays in the late 60s, actually. So I am the person who discovered that the x-rays of the skull are totally incompatible with the photographs that show an undamaged face. And this was in 1978. And Lifton found it out in 1988 when I was doing the layout for my book, which I researched and wrote and self-published. And there were 12 people, 10 people sitting around the table, and me and Groden, and I explained why I wanted to have that x-ray of the skull side by side with this picture, because it shows that they are incompatible. That's when Groden found it out, and he told Lifton, who's been paying him all these years. So this area is out of focus here. The background is in focus. The foreground here, the part closest to the camera, is perfectly in focus. But all this area is smudged and whatever. But it's fake. The color photographs, which Groden has, in my opinion, are very clever paintings. And I blurted that out in 1979 when I saw those. I said, I think these are very clever paintings. This got me in a lot of trouble with these people, but certain people have a franchise in this case, and it's always either or, black or white. See, never yin-yang, never something in between, a third answer to all of this. It's either body alteration or this is a matte line, matte insertion process, but not something else. Not that they didn't colorize the doc's drawings, which are tracings of forgeries. See, you have to ask how certain people, paint certain things. But I want to tell you this now, and we'll get into this tomorrow with Joel's lecture. But I've been in Dallas this year filming the doctors who were involved with this tracheostomy and who saw it. And I have had some very difficult interviews again with Perry this year over this. But the issue that Lifton presents is that the body was made into a, quote, perfect medical forgery in order to fool the camera lens. This is absolutely preposterous, according to Cyril Wecht and every other doctor I've talked to. So the question is, was the body altered or was it tampered with? And we have major semantic problems when people are not trained in humanities and language and English and history, but they're engineers, and they confuse the word laceration with incision, or confuse alteration with tampering. This body may very well have been tampered with. I'm learning many things from the witnesses that Lifton had that they told him that he did not tell you because it conflicts with his theories. Many things that he did say, but he withheld other information, many things that were distorted. He has here a statement on page 193 of his book that he quotes, Nurse Bowron wrote, Miss Hinchcliffe and myself prepared the body by removing the remaining clothes. We then washed the blood from the president's face and body. The other nurses were very careful to explain in their depositions that they didn't wash it because they understood forensic evidence, you don't mess with it, you don't wash it away. See, so I checked Lifton's source here. He sources in two of the Warren Commission hearings, page 183. It happens to be Roy Kellerman's deposition. I looked in the Sylvia-Mar index for Nurse Bowron. She's not there. I looked through all the Warren things. She did have some things like the British newspaper clippings where they interviewed her, but nowhere so far that I can find did she write anything that could have been this quote here. This is the kind of thing we're dealing with. All right, I'm not here. I'm going to stop that right there. We're going to get on with that tomorrow in a discussion of what I'm learning from the witnesses and what Joel has to say, and how a lot of you have been. We have been tied up in knots for 10 years because of this book of his and the things that he's saying, but we're not dealing with key issues. In Bob Cutler's drawing, he has this big wound right here in the front of the head. See, right here, where it is happens to be in the x-rays. But there is not one witness who saw that body who says that his face was anything but perfect. His face was totally undamaged. There was no bone missing, no nothing here. And with the x-rays, there is no bone whatsoever from right here, covering the eye, all the way back. Totally gone. Those of you who have my book know. By the way, I got a bunch of hardbacks here, and I'm practically giving them away, but they show these pictures a lot better than paperbacks. There's also the possibility of a tangential shot. The department doctors believed, after watching this clear film, that it was a tangential shot that hit him. Those of us who really studied Dealey Plaza believe that the actual shots came from the manholes in front of the car on both sides, up on the overpass at the juncture of the fence and to the left. The bullet mark on the sidewalk, of course, pointed precisely to the manhole to the left. They were up above the car. It was an easy shot. And military snipers are always in the ground. They're never up high. That doesn't mean there wasn't a gunman up high. There were decoy gunmen in the plaza. Just make a couple more points.
If I heard this, thank you real quick, Harry. Regarding the tangential shot, I wanted to bring this up during Bob Cutler's presentation. One thing that I observed was on the diagram, he showed Kennedy's face is facing straight ahead at the time of the fatal headshot. If you recall from looking at Zapruder film 312, his face is turned to the side and he's starting to slump forward. So on the subject of the tangential headshot, the badge man shot on here and a couple of the other diagrams, I think it should be kept in mind the angle that his head was at when the shot hit, if it hit from the grass knoll or from one of the manhole covers.
33 degrees or 34 degrees, whichever takes it.
Yeah, I'm not sure the exact number of degrees, but you can remember from the
Zapruder film diagram
that it is leaning forward some to the. Oh, okay, 34 degrees. Okay. There's another diagram where it appears straight ahead.
See, we have 50-some witnesses who either ran up on that knoll or saw him or swear to the fact that there were gunmen up there. But they were farther down that fence where the acoustical testing replaced them and so on. And there's a lot of witnesses to what was going on up there. There were men up there with flashing Secret Service badges that we were sure were phonies. It would have been impossible for Bowers to see a man in the 6th floor window and identify him. In fact, there's questions about that. Yeah.
I just want to make sure that we clear this up before we get too far. Are you saying that the headshot came from the manhole on the left-hand side in front of the limousine?
I believe that one shot had to have come from there because of the bullet mark, which is no longer on the sidewalk.
Yeah, but I mean, do you mean the headshot?
No, I didn't say that. I said that
They hit the bumper,
we believe.
hit the headlight or something.
No, there was a bullet mark on the sidewalk, and the police car got up on the
You're
sidewalk.
saying it's the headshot that came from
I
the...
didn't say that.
Well, that's what I want to know. Okay, so you're not saying the headshot came from the manhole cover?
It is possible that if there was a forward headshot, that rather than from the the fence. And I don't think that the Mormon photograph and all this is ever going to prove the damn thing myself. But as a speculation, and I don't think we will ever get to the bottom of this issue unless someone comes forward and it can be corroborated. But as a speculation, I've been in that manhole, and that's the obvious place, and all the rest of it is
So
crap.
I'm saying that the shot in the manhole didn't hit the head. So I'm wondering what it did
We're talking about
hit.
two different manholes there. One on the left and one on the right.
Well,
The one on the left hit the sidewalk alongside the car.
Okay. And the other shot,
The
you said
other
it hit the head?
The head shot may very well have been from the manhole in the juncture of the overpass with the stockade fence. You know the manhole I'm speaking of? The railroad track behind it. That's the obvious place for a sniper. Anybody standing on that fence is crazy, see?
But you're
And
saying
then he can get through the pipes and out.
if it didn't, I'm wondering what it hit. Do you think maybe it hit the windshield instead?
Well, the windshield was struck from behind, apparently.
Okay, so you're saying it didn't hit the windshield and it didn't hit JFK's head. I'm wondering what it
No,
hit.
because you're shooting over the top of the windshield. If you get in the manhole, you're still above the car.
Yeah, but you're saying it didn't hit the windshield. You're saying it didn't hit the head. So I'm wondering what it hit. Do you have any idea what it hit?
We're talking about two different gunmen, possible gunmen, two different manholes. If the guy to the right front of the car, the windshield is not in the way, he's firing right directly at Kennedy. There's nothing in the way for that.
That's what I'm talking about.
All right, that may have been the headshot.
Scar on the.
That may have been the headshot, but it's no point in
But it is
spending a lot of
headshot,
time
yeah.
on speculation, all right? It's just not rational to me that if somebody was in the sixth floor window, they didn't shoot at the car coming toward it, and it's not rational to me that a man would be standing behind that fence in full view of everybody firing. See, that's decoy and have it.
Yeah, probably people either have, stating it or have not, but I kind of worked it through, and is not being able to visualize the sewer being at a point at which the car in its declination allows someone at that sewer. to
The
be-
one alongside the car in the ground, you mean?
Yeah, and so what they need to see maybe is the sewer's relationship to the declination of the street in relationship possibly to a limousine-like object on the street.
Yeah, I think it's very possible that somebody was in that sewer.
But I think that
I don't discount that. I think
we probably need
there's
to
some-
see those relationships, maybe in 3 dimensions. or
In the next
something.
film, you can. In the next film, you really can.
I wanted to tell you this. Let me make a statement first. I've spent a lot of time with the Parkland witnesses since 1979. Some of them I consider friends, and I consider them friends. I have 8 of the men from the autopsy that I have spent a great deal of time with. Now, any lawyer knows that trying to deal with testimony from witnesses is very, very difficult. When Paul Connor said there was no brain in the head, it's because he wasn't in the room. He told Lifton, he marked down 8 o'clock when that body came in. It couldn't have come in at 8 o'clock. It had to have been there by 7 o'clock. The plane landed at 6 o'clock, and at 5 after 6, within 10 minutes, actually within a few minutes, maybe 5 minutes, they were out of there with that body, and at the maximum amount of time was 45 minutes to get to Bethesda. Now, I'm not saying that somebody didn't get at the body. I have one witness from Bethesda who has given me extensive testimony that may indicate surgery, pre-exam, bullets removed. And I'm working with him, and I'm not going to lie to you, and I'm just telling you that that's where I'm at right now. I don't know yet what the answer is, but I'm going to also tell you this. At Parkland Hospital, when Dr. Tim Clark describes that casket as a plain, bronze-colored plastic casket, when the hospital supervisor calls it a plain coffin, see, when Paul Connor tells you, and it's even repeated in the best evidence, by shipping casket, I don't mean a simple Vietnam-type shipping casket. It was a coffin. It was a viewing coffin, the cheek. See, the point is that under the shock of the circumstances, and I'm going to say this is the answer either, but nobody is thinking in time sequences very well, and nobody is thinking in terms of focusing exactly on that casket. That's what funeral directors count on when they're cheating you, of which most of them are. See, and they charge, he's charged the government, he charged them $1,395, I think it was. He got paid $13,395 in 1965. There's something funny going on about the casket. Secondly, what nobody picked up on, including Lifton, is that Doris Nelson said that body was out of there at 2:10. And we have a report on the Dallas police tapes that at 2:15 it was at Love Field. Then we have the Aubrey Wright clearing the hospital at 3 o'clock, and those doctors said the body's out of there at 3 o'clock, see? So we have a possibility of 2 different times of departures of either a body or casket. So there's some unanswered questions that I'm working on right now with great intensity. And I did not intend to write another book in this case. I didn't intend to write the first one, but my professors literally, I won't say forced, but they went to great lengths to get me to do it. And I had quit. I wasn't going to go on with this. But I'm doing it. So I'm goddamn man, the fakers in this case with their innuendo, with their circumstantial evidence, with their guilt by association, and the public is being misled. We are ridiculed. We're called buffs. Some of us call ourselves buffs. This word should be expunged and purged from our vocabularies. Yeah, John.
Yeah, I want to ask you about something you mentioned at the very beginning of your presentation. You brought up the matter of the missing autopsy materials, the wound name slides and the brain and so forth. Do you know who the National Archives says had custody of those materials, the last known custody?
Well, if you're going to say Kennedys, they never had constructed.
That's what they tell you.
I know. They may don't know that, but that sounds like what they would say. But the Kennedys never actually had physical custody of this material. It was always for a time it was in a box in
the foot locker was eventually transferred to A.G. Novello,
Yeah.
Robert Kennedy's secretary. And then there was a chauffeur who claimed that he did accept a large crate from the National Archives to take it in behalf of Robert Kennedy. So there may not be anything sinister about that.
Well, I think that the opposite. My study of it shows that they never had constructive custody of it. But if you can put it different, I'll see it. We should have a paper on this.
Number one, Kennedy did not have physical possession of it. Number two, the agents transferring were Treasury agents, specifically was probably the Secret Service. So they're between one transfer point and another. Federal agents have possession of the locker, probably Secret Service. But you need to find out who the transfer agents were.
Yeah.
At that point, it's again in possession of people who might have been involved in an attempted.
I will tell you on the 7th of December.
But every time it's transferred, I understand, but every time it's transferred, it's in the hands of Secret Service agents or federal agents.
It was never out of their hands. Now,
We're talking about two different things. We're talking about property rights and physical evidence. In other words, property rights can be transferred legally, but physical evidence may not be transferred.
well, it's questionable whether the contract was ever legal, that the Kennedys ever had legal right to possession. You want to go right now?
No lunch. The JFK Research Conference, the third decade. We're going to have 4 speakers this afternoon. And the first 3, well, actually the first 4, all 4 speakers, for these people, we will have papers to distribute. They are available. Unfortunately, 3 of them are in my office, which I'll have to hustle over here before we leave. But George Michael's paper, I believe you left up here, didn't you?
Yeah.
So it's available. And are there people that didn't get it? Okay, maybe somebody out there in the front row could hand those out on his place. Thank you, David.
Here's more of that catalog collection.
What?
That catalog collection, that kind of. I have some more in the clock. I don't know any more here. Okay, thanks.
Late arrival. This is Andy Winnie Archuk of the Last Hurrah Bookstore. Yeah, I saw some hands go. Oh,
Somebody else will up, but I still
Okay, Tony Marsh, our first presenter, is known to most of you for, I guess, mostly for the research he's done on acoustics material. The paper today will deal only incidentally with acoustics evidence research and centrally with the overall issue of computer use in JFK assassination research.
Now, if I go too fast, or if there's something you don't understand, can you just write down your question and remember to ask me after the discussant has his discourse? And occasionally I might pass around one copy of something that I'm talking about that I might be holding up, and then I'll start it around, and you can just pass it around. And if there's anything that you actually want a copy of for me, for your own research, can you just write down your mailing address and what it is that you want a copy of, and I'll try to mail it to you, like maps or whatever you might happen to want. You can give it to me later. Okay, there are several ways that computers have been used in investigating the assassination of President Kennedy, and even more potential uses. We'll outline some of the ways computers have been used, including some of the ways I have used computers, and how computers could be used more in the future. The first method is statistical analysis. Although statistical analysis can be done by hand or with a pocket calculator, which is just a handheld computer anyway, using a computer has certain advantages which gives the researcher more productivity. More calculations can be done more quickly and data analyzed in more ways more easily. Even statistical packages, which used to be available only on a mainframe computer, are increasingly becoming available for microcomputers. Even a beginner who is not familiar with statistical theory can duplicate some of the statistical tests used by BB&N in their study of the Dallas Police Department tape, given the right program and valid data to input. Second method, physical analysis. Studies which would have been difficult back in the 60s may be easier to do now with increased computer power. Things like spectral analysis or neutron activation tests could be done with smaller sample sizes. Blood testing, which might have been ruled out due to the small size of the sample, might now or soon be possible. This might clear up questions such as what bullet fragments hit which persons and objects. A third way, fingerprint ID. Computerization of fingerprint ID files makes it easier to find matches with unmatched prints. Computerized searches through fingerprint databases might be used to prove identities of suspects that were not possible before. Eventually, computerized matching might even allow one to prove that a fingerprint was planted or when it was left. Fourth method, DNA fingerprinting. Although some courts have not accepted DNA typing as conclusive proof, some experts believe the test to be 99.9% reliable. By matching DNA material in a sample to a person, it is possible to prove things that could not be proven by an ordinary blood test. DNA material may survive intact much longer than a blood sample. So even after 27 years, it might be possible to learn something more about the JFK assassination by DNA testing. For example, it might be possible to prove which blood covered which parts of the limousine. Was it only JFK's blood or possibly brain matter on the windshield? Or was some of the blood Governor Connolly's? Or is the blood on the windshield now neither men's, proving that the FBI or the Secret Service fabricated the windshield evidence? If someone had saved the cigarette butts from behind the grassy knoll, perhaps a DNA test would indicate the general racial or national characteristics of the shooter. The testing might become so sophisticated and the database large enough that you could show that the individual was of German extraction with a rare medical condition and chain-smoked Camel cigarettes. A fifth method, digitized photographs. Computer enhancement of photographs has been used to glean more detail and clean up photographs studied by the House Select Committee. Some enhancements can disprove a theory by showing that what looks like a gunman is merely an optical illusion due to the fuzziness of the photograph, or enhancement might bring out details such as the shadow of a rifle. Digitizing photographs also allows a researcher to compare photographs more easily, plot movements, and extrapolate hidden objects. Sixth method, digitized audio. Because computers are inherently digital, it makes it easier to study audio sources when you convert the typical analog signal into digital. Even the least expensive home computer can now digitize sounds and store the information in files. I was going to bring an example, but I can't with this setup. This makes it easier to manipulate and analyze the data without expensive equipment. Plus, there's the advantage of being able to print out hard copy for analysis. One project that I have just begun is digitizing the Dallas Police Department tape with the Commodore computer. I hope to find patterns which suggest a previously unidentified shot. And with the right programs, any researcher might be able to duplicate the work done originally by BB&N or Weiss-Naskenas. The program which I'm currently using stores information as a .raw file, which is compatible with other computers. Other programmers and I are working on programs which will display and analyze the raw files. It might be possible to prove or disprove that certain messages on both channels are crosstalk of the same message, or that the bell sound indeed is a bell, or that it is an electrical interference, or that the sound right before the siren on the cycle with the open microphone being turned on is actually the arcing sound of the switch being turned on to start the siren. That might prove that the open mic was on the cycle in the motorcade. Seventh method, CD. It appears that CD players are rapidly becoming a replacement for tapes and records. It would be great if someone could arrange to put the Dallas Police Department tape onto a CD for other researchers to use. Or a conference such as this one could be archived onto a CD. If you remember the record that Gallery magazine sent out with the article about the JFK assassination, the same type of thing could be done on a CD. A CD version would be more durable, not subject to defects and damage, and you could remember and repeat tracks with some of the advanced CD players that are out there. There are lots of old recordings which should be preserved before they deteriorate beyond recognition. CDs may soon be writable for reasonable cost so that research audio can be archived for future records. 8. CD-ROM. A CD which holds non-audio visual data can archive great amounts of data and make it available to a researcher almost instantaneously. One CD-ROM can hold the equivalent of an encyclopedia. Instead of searching through stacks of papers in a library, one could insert one CD and search through all the papers in a matter of seconds. Cross-indexing could allow you to find an obscure reference that you might have missed with a manual search. All occurrences of a key word could be located and printed out so that you could quickly see a pattern that you might have missed with a lengthy hand search through documents. A ninth way, optical character recognition. New hardware allows the computer to scan a printed page and convert the information into a form that the computer can remember, either on a device which looks like a copy machine or with a handheld scanner. You can pass a light over a printed page and have the computer convert the image into a text file. This could be useful for entering old documents into a database rather than retyping them. 10th way, high-resolution printing. A new generation of printers which can print many dots instead of just letters like a typewriter gives researchers more flexibility in handling printing out documents. Cheaper laser printers and more powerful software give the average and unsophisticated user desktop publishing capabilities, such as a wide choice of fonts and styles, graphics, good enough to include photographs, and easy reformatting of text. Another project that I'd like to see developed is reconstruction of documents. Some old documents are in such bad shape that they simply can't be read. Copies of copies and deterioration make documents unusable to researchers in their current forms. If they could be carefully converted and cleaned out, one could print out versions which would look almost exactly identical to the original document. One way that I've used such a reconstruction is to recreate the original text from a 1963 Department of State telegram. And you can start passing them around. And he'll just pass it around to everybody. The original draft of this cable had a lot of words X'd out so that you couldn't read what the original draft was supposed to say. But I was able to see most of the text underneath the Xing out and typed it into my word processor. And then printed out what I believe to be the original text, the original draft of the cable as an aid to researchers. Scanning would make that much easier and quicker to do. And perhaps OCR software could be taught to see the original text under the Xing out. I had only a 9-pin dot matrix printer to reprint the telegram, but a laser printer might be able to reprint it exactly so that one would think it was the original telegram draft. Facsimile. Facsimile transmission allows one to send a document in almost its original form anywhere immediately. This could be of great help to a researcher who needs to find a missing piece to the puzzle very quickly. A document could even be sent to someone who doesn't have a fax by arrangement with a local store that offers such a convenience. Not only is there no waiting for the mail or wondering if it will survive the mail, one does not take any chance of losing the original. Local libraries now offer fax. This makes it possible to get copies of articles from anywhere across the country. If you're not able to find a copy of a rare book or an obscure magazine, your local library might be able to locate it and have it faxed for you. This is how I was able to get better quality copies of some magazines and newspaper articles from a library which had the original material instead of microfiche. Databases. Storage of research material in a computerized database offers options not available to paper storage. Hand searching can be time-consuming and is inherently error-prone as fatigue creeps in and one misses otherwise obvious details. Having the data in a computer form allows one to use the computer power to access all the data quickly. Searches for all references to any word can find references to documents which might have been missed before or dismissed as irrelevant. The Assassination Archives and Research Center has an ongoing database project available to researchers, such as Mary Farrell's Index, Daniel Brandt's, or Jeff Meek's. If all available documents were put into a computer database, one might be able to find documents which the researcher might never have thought to look for. The use of Boolean operators would make it possible to find unusual references or narrow one's search through a maze of references. Cross-indexing of photo collections such as sprigs might help you find a photograph that you didn't know existed, or track an individual's movements through various photographs, such as the Umbrella Man. BBSs, an electronic bulletin board, which can be accessed from your home computer via modem, would greatly expand researchers' abilities to communicate and exchange information. Instead of sending letters and waiting weeks for replies, researchers could log on to exchange information very quickly. Someone might pose a question about some technical point outside that person's expertise and find it answered by someone who is an expert in that field right away. A public message area would allow everyone to keep up to date with the latest research and exchange information that everyone can benefit from. Private message areas are quite helpful when somebody wants to contact another researcher but might not be able to find the person at home or at the right time, or wishes privacy or something that they can't do by voice. Conferencing allows callers to talk to each other online in real time rather than leave messages. Files areas allow you to store information permanently so that anyone else can retrieve it at any time. This could be text files, documents, maps, graphics, or data files. I know there's been some interest expressed by some people in setting up a BBS for researchers, and I would be willing to help if setting it up if someone can handle financing of it. One possible alternative would be a national BBS, such as, rather than a local board, such as CompuServe, which is the largest in the country, although it is very expensive, or another system such as Bix or Genie, which may have lower rates but may not be available everywhere to everyone in the country. Another possibility is FidoNet. This would allow one to leave a message on a local BBS, which it then sends around the world until it's picked up by the other local BBS. Many of the echoes carried by FidoNet are particularly narrow in their focus, and it might be possible to convince the administrators of the system to carry a JFK assassination echo. but convincing your local BBS to carry it may be almost impossible, very difficult. It might be necessary to set up your own computer to connect into the Echo directly, which could also result in very expensive phone calls. 14, word processing. This may be too obvious, but there are still people who prefer to use a typewriter. I don't think I'd ever go back to typing in things with a typewriter. Using a good word processor with your computer allows you to do more with your text. Underlining, bold-faced, compressed, expanded text can be used to much more easily when it's entered into a word processor. Old letters can be reprinted to circulate copies to others. And letters and articles can be exchanged or collaborated on via disk, so the changes can be made and resaved easily. Everyone makes mistakes, and it's often easier to fix them when you have it in a word processor. Using the search and replace feature, spell checker, style checker, etc., make it easier to correct errors and update information. One problem to watch out for, though, is which format is used to store the file. For example, IBMs typically end the line with a carriage return and a line feed, while Amigas use only a line feed so that a carriage return ends in a blank line. Commodores usually will have a carriage return, but can ignore the line feed, so you might end up with a document printed all on one line. Some word processors store their native files in a non-ASCII format, so you have to perform some special operation to convert a file into a normal ASCII text file. With some programs like WordStar, it may be as simple as turning off the high bit or toggling off document mode. With others, such as the Commodore programs, it might be necessary to convert the PETSCII into screen folks into ASCII with another utility program. Ultrasonic measurements. Another pet project that I'd like to see someone accomplish is to design and build a highly accurate device to measure distances with ultrasound. There are ultrasonic tape measures on the market for the home carpenter, but they're not very accurate and their range is too limited. Polaroid used to sell the ultrasonic unit similar to their Spectre camera, which uses it to autofocus, but I'm not sure that they could be adapted for the accuracy required. The application I have in mind, of course, is to get a very accurate map of Dealey Plaza. There have been various versions of the map, the placements of the objects, and the inaccuracy of the maps was one of the factors taken into account by the acoustical studies done for the House Committee. Greater accuracy would allow the studies to be duplicated with greater precision, and the movements of objects and people through Dealey Plaza could be plotted more accurately. An example. This is a computer printout that I've done of a drawing of a map that I made with my computer program that I use with the Commodore computer. Although I've drawn previous versions, I find it easier to use a computer now. One reason is I have no artistic talent, so I prefer to let the computer draw lines and curves. One problem, on the other hand, is that sometimes the lines and curves won't be drawn smoothly. And in this case of the Jaggies results from the fact that the computer can only store and send out dots. More sophisticated programs using the right printers can send out commands which draw smoother lines and curves. And right now my program can only print out 640 dots across the page by 720 dots down the page. So my map has a scale of 1 dot or pixel equals 1/2 foot. That's great enough accuracy for most of my study, but creates a problem when you have to round out distances. One thing to watch out for when rounding is to have objects stay in nearly the same